Okay, welcome to the Radical Anthropology Group. This evening we have Dr. Camilla Power, who was trained in evolutionary as well as cultural evolutionary anthropology at University College London under Leslie Ayello. For many years, she's been head of anthropology at University of East London, and she's now at University College London once again. And just briefly, UCL is one of the very few anthropology departments in the world, really, where it's all the different branches of anthropology are available. And so the archaeology, the biological anthropology, the social anthropology, not exactly combined, but it's possible in the same institution to do all three. And Camilla is one of the, I would say, very few anthropologists who feels equally at home in the symbolic as well as the archaeological and the biological dimensions of how we became human and what it means to be human. And of course, this evening, she's continuing her research on the Neanderthals. So over to you, Camilla.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you. Good to sort of come back home to UCL. It's telling me I'm unstable. So Chris, shout at me if you can't hear properly. Are you okay?
I can hear.
Great. Okay, so changing myths of the Neanderthals. It's now over 10 years since there were 2 earthquakes in human origins research. In 2010, the first earthquake, number 1, was the discovery of a full genome of a hominin that we never even suspected existed, the Denisovan human from a tiny little finger bone in the Denisovan cave of Siberia. And hard on the heels of this incredible genetic discovery of some close sister lineage came a full nuclear genome of Neanderthals that showed that we humans, particularly the humans who were descendants of those who came out of Africa in the big migrations, we had a significant chunk of Neanderthal genome that we'd inherited, up to some average of the 2% of our heritage was Neanderthal on average. And besides which, we had in some populations in Asia, some up to 6-7% of a Denisovan contribution to modern human genetics. So this is the genetic inheritance after long time periods, after thousands, tens of thousands of years from relatively small populations of other humans. And to imagine that our bodies, our behavior, our brains today are still being influenced by this heritage, surely must just change our whole views about what it means to be human. We've got to start thinking in quite different ways about these 3 concurrent lineages from the late Middle Pleistocene into the late Pleistocene. The Neanderthals, the Denisovans, and ourselves, very large-brained hominins. And let's just remember that at that time period, there were at least 7 Homo species. We probably haven't found some of them. At least 7 Homo species hanging on in there. But these 3 very large-brained humans, they represent a kind of experiment, a long time running experiment of all the possible variable outcomes of what it is to be human. That has really got to change. Well, it has completely changed perspectives in human origins research and paleontology. In the bad old days, and I was brought up in these bad old days of the old, what was called the human revolution, that human revolution was conceived of as modern humans incoming into Europe, sweeping in and just taking over from the Neanderthals, who really couldn't cope with the competition. That the modern humans, nobody ever talked about what had happened in Africa. The modern humans just appearing on the horizon in Europe, creating all this new symbolic, amazing culture. And the Neanderthals were considered to, they just had some kind of cognitive deficit. It was just they were lacking in something. Sometimes it was described as a language gene, or else they couldn't join up their thinking properly. And Neanderthals were viewed as just, just not the sharpest tools in the box. They certainly were not admitted to to being participants in the symbolic domain. They weren't citizens of that symbolic domain. So if perhaps they picked up what an industry that I'll talk about a little today, the chattel Peronian, this was only seen as sort of pathetically copying modern humans as to try and keep up. But they didn't even understand what they were doing. That was the kind of viewpoint. Well, necessarily, all of that is completely swept away today. If we realize what kind of intimate relationships we've had with Neanderthals. We've had babies with, our ancestors, I should say, have had babies with Neanderthals, have had babies with Denisovans. The Neanderthals and the Denisovans had plenty of babies too. If we had such intimate relations, it no longer becomes possible to imagine Neanderthals, those big Neanderthal eyes. They must have been cooperative eyes just as much as humans' eyes are. They must have had language, or rather, because Neanderthal terrain spreads across such a wide area, they would have had probably several languages, different languages potentially. Whatever I say about the Neanderthals stands also for the Denisovans, although the Denisovans, they're not going to play as much of a part in what I'm showing you tonight, simply because we don't have the same degree of knowledge. 10 or 20 years from now, I'd be putting my money on the Denisovans being the coolest humans of the lot. But we're going to find out. But what I'm really going for is a kind of multi-regional model of symbolic revolutions, a symbolic revolution for Neanderthals, just as much as symbolic revolution for modern humans, our African lineage, and for the Denisovans. So that's what I intend to kind of outline tonight. But then how do we approach the differences in the outcomes that have been experienced by all these human lineages? I'm calling them all absolutely humans. Why is it me as a modern human, even if I'm bearing Neanderthal genes, giving this lecture tonight, and not a Neanderthal giving a lecture tonight about what happened to those so smart, so clever Africans? Okay, so I'm going to take you to a slideshow on this to give you a bit more of the sort of science stuff, and we'll see how quickly I can get through that. Are we sharing? That's sharing. Okay. Let's go. Okay, have we got the screen share? And I'll size it up. Is that all good, Chris?
Yes.
We're good. Great. Okay. So, okay, first of all, I've nicked some slides from Chris Stringer to start off with. Oh, for some reason it's not going forward. Why am I not going forward? Okay. Just to give you an indication of the position, the relationships between these humans, just to clarify the dates and timelines a little bit for people. So the green up, we're looking really at the top left-hand corner of this chart of from Stringer and his colleagues just about a year ago. And up in the top left, we have the green blocks for ourselves, Homo sapiens, African lineage, over the last part of the Middle Pleistocene into the Late Pleistocene. And then on the just sister lineages opposite them from Eurasia, the yellow blocks, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans. Okay, now the question was, in the last few years, where is the common ancestor in the region kind of 600,000–700,000 years ago? And the answer being given was often to talk about Homo heidelbergensis, that purple block there. But the problem with that position, which has been a position that's been a really kind of concurrent position for a couple of decades, was this population, these people, right, I'm going to get forward. Okay, another acknowledge Chris Stringer's slide here again. The people of Cima de los Huesos, Atapuerca near Burgos in Spain. A population of at least 28 individuals of various ages, including a lot of young adults and teenagers, who were disposed into a mass grave in these limestone caverns of Atapuerca. Now, this is a remarkable population for many, many reasons. It's provided the very oldest ancient DNA, MIT DNA, and it is now giving a reliable date about 430,000 years ago, which puts it right deep into the end of a glacial stage. Now, I'm going to say a bit more about what was happening to Atapuerca people. But the point is that amongst the Atapuerca remains, there are definite skulls and remains that have proto-Neanderthal. They're early Neanderthal. In fact, sometimes they're called early Neanderthals. So Cima 5, for instance, the 5 skull, you can see already that pulled out Neanderthal face with the back of the skull with its kind of beginnings of a Neanderthal shape to it. And the MIT DNA was showing a really close connections of Atapuerca to both Neanderthals and Denisovans. So what that is saying is we've really got the Cima fossils. If we look at the middle chart to keep things simple in there, we've got the Cima fossils right early at the root of division between Neanderthals and Denisovans. Now, what that's doing is it's pushing back the possible common ancestor of ourselves as the Africans with the Eurasian hominins. And there really isn't space and time here for heidelbergensis to be the one that's the daddy of, or the mummy of all of these lineages. Instead, if we move to the right-hand side, we can see that the lineages, Neanderthals and Denisovans, emerging as very close sister lineages, but the heidelbergensis becomes a kind of cousin or sister lineage with the African lineage off to the side, and heidelbergensis lying between the Eurasians and the Africans. So that pushes our ancestor back to something like what's known as Homo antecessor, that comes from another Atapuerca site, Grandolina, about 800,000 years ago. Okay, so this is just showing the positions of the lineages relatively, but what we've got to remember is that this is not just straight separate lines, but there are braided streams between constant interaction and miscegenation between Neanderthal and Denisovan populations, and also from the Africans into the Neanderthal and Denisovans. Okay, so we'll have a little bit of a look first before I go on to talk about these kind of old models that were disrespectful of the Neanderthals. Have just a little bit of a look at the actual evidence in fossils of interbreed, of definitely modern humans meeting Neanderthals, which explains, which gives the reality, the sort of the bone, if not the flesh, to our heritage, our Neanderthal DNA heritage. Okay, so these are examples that the expectation is, where is the place where we actually bumped into Neanderthals? On the way out of Africans coming out through the Middle East, the Near East. So this this skull Mano down in the right-hand corner of something like 50,000 years old it's a modern human, although it has possible Neanderthal aspect at the back, but it's a modern human classified. And it's from a Galilee, Israeli side. And this is in the right place at the right time to be meeting various Neanderthal populations in that area. And why we've got the other two guys on the slide are because these are specimens, fossil specimens, which have provided DNA that is showing Neanderthal ancestry. In the case of Ustishim, which is a femur up in Siberia, it's some of the oldest DNA from modern humans at all. I think it is the oldest. And it is showing chunks of Neanderthal genome from something like 7,000 years before, and probably again 2,000 years earlier than that date of 45. So we can see the Middle East would be producing potentially the ancestry that leads to this mixed modern human bone up in Siberia. And then there's some famous cases at Peștera in Romania, where this jawbone is was showing genetics which showed a 4 to 6 generation, that it was a great-great-grandson of a Neanderthal. And indeed, although it is classified as modern human, it has Neanderthal aspects in that jaw. So this is one of the earliest of the modern humans in European Upper Paleolithic, as is of course the Siberian bone. But just yesterday, some of you may have heard news about, and I was kind of hoping Matt Pope might be, I don't know if Matt's come in at all, that he might be here and might be able to tell us something about these amazing teeth that were found. They're actually found a century ago, but the analysis of these teeth from a cave in Jersey, La Cotte, which is a famous Neanderthal, well-known Neanderthal site. But these teeth are showing the mixture of Neanderthal roots with the crowns being modern. And they are said to be, by Chris Stringer no less, that they are the best evidence yet of a mix, a definite sort of fossil evidence of some mix. So modern humans getting already into the west of Europe, the Upper Paleolithic, coming to a meeting, a mingling, and producing hybrid offspring with this Neanderthal population. Okay, so that's the later stage of the Neanderthal mixing and meeting modern humans, which is kind of what we might expect as modern humans come out of Africa, that they would start bumping into Neanderthal populations, and we would get some evidence of that. But it isn't just that. There is smoking gun evidence too for considerably earlier intermingling. In fact, upwards of 200,000 years ago, intermingling of moderns with introgression from moderns from African origin into Neanderthal lineages. And some of the real evidence for this is the fact that Neanderthal Y chromosomes, quite surprisingly, at an age already of like 100,000-year-old, 90,000-year-old Neanderthals, look suspiciously similar to early modern human Y chromosomes, whereas Denisovans have their own quite distinctive Y chromosome lineage. Now, Y chromosome is what passes male to male lineage. So it would be coming from males from African origin, modern humans coming up out of Africa. But we're beginning to get increasing amount of evidence that modern humans were getting out of Africa, they were escaping Africa and the Middle East even, into Europe and Asia at earlier stages than the later major migrations out of Africa that we've always heard of. So we have Ms. Leah Jaw of Mount Carmel in Israel at 185,000. There are Chinese fossils which could date in the range 100 to 120,000 that look pretty modern as well, Jiangdong, Dakshan. And this is now, Apidema Cave, which is Greek site, is now housing possibly, although it isn't totally accepted, one of the earliest of all modern humans. So the Apidema site has two crania, two skulls, with a Neanderthal, pretty clear Neanderthal at the top of 170,000 years. But an older skull is described by Katrina Harvati and her colleagues as being, it doesn't have really derived, really classic characteristics of Neanderthals. It doesn't look very Neanderthal-like, and they're ascribing it to what they call primitive modern, if that makes sense, a very early version of modern that has already strayed into Southern Europe, already got up there. So this isn't necessarily the guy that could replace the Neanderthal Y chromosomes, but it's a representative of the population in the right place at the right time to be doing that. So we're looking at several streams of introgression coming modern humans into Neanderthals, Neanderthals back into modern humans, going over this long time period, over like 200,000 from 250,000 years ago already. Okay, so that's just to give a position on the sort of genetic relationships and how long this type of interbreeding may have been going on. There may have been episodes of upwards of 6, 7 already demonstrated by the few examples of fossils that we have, and the few examples of genetic extraction that we have. So when we now approach the question of why is it that the Neanderthals went extinct? Well, for starters, the kind of Neanderthals are us. They are here to some extent living and breeding, and we can't just deny that. But let's go through a few of the bad old arguments from the 90s, from the time when we all assumed, oh, modern humans replaced Neanderthals entirely. What were kind of some of the dumb arguments about that? And then I'm going to suggest what would be the sorts of models that would be much more instructive, that would be telling us more about both what's similar and what's different to Neanderthals. Okay, so some of the most prominent models were just they couldn't talk proper. They didn't know how to speak properly. They couldn't shape their vowels. People like Lieberman and Kralin, looking at the base of Neanderthal skulls and saying, oh, they couldn't flex their tongues. They had too flat skulls, basis, and so on. All of this has really been chucked out of the window with examination of Neanderthal vocal tracts, the hyoid bones and so forth. And as I say, very few people today are going to deny Neanderthals some aspect of language. And we'll talk more about what, if they have language, according to the models of RAG, language comes because Neanderthals inhabit a symbolic, a virtual domain within which they sing, they dance, they shamanize. So we're going to have to kind of deal with that aspect. Okay, another typical model came from Prehistory of the Mind of Steve Mython, excellent archaeologist who was very fond of modular mind models. So what he suggested was, well, Neanderthals had superb technological skills, okay, superb natural history skills, okay, and they were obviously very socially sophisticated creatures, but for whatever reason, they couldn't join up those separate module parts of the mind. They didn't have a kind of overarching executive mental kind of control, overarching control. That sort of mental massive modularity has really gone out of fashion these days in favor of much more general intelligence models. So we're going to leave, Neanderthals couldn't join up their thinking properly, couldn't attain abstract thinking type of argument. We're going to kick that one into touch as well. The big brains, we're going to come to the question of Neanderthals' very large brains. Probably they are, somewhat similar size to ours, because as Rebecca Ragg-Sykes puts it in her excellent book Kindred, a lot of the Neanderthal samples are big males. which is why we're going to get rather heavy, they're biased towards larger brains compared to a more gender balanced sample, potentially. So Neanderthal brains and our brains, they're very overlapping, they're very, very similar kind of sizes. We'll say a bit more about that later. But the idea is that because they had such big, robust bodies, well, actually they weren't all that encephalized. Now, a more sophisticated version of this idea is looking at Neanderthals' very big eyes and arguing that a large part of their brains was given over to the visual neocortex. Neanderthal eyes had some sort of superpowers that might have been to do with living in, deep, high latitude European dark nights, that maybe they had better vision for twilight and darkness than we do. We're not sure what it is. But so the idea was that if they had this extra brain capacity devoted to visual cortex, then maybe that traded off against social brain, the social neocortex. So visual is kind of the non-social neocortex, and the rest of it would be devoted to. So that's kind of a more interesting idea, but I'm not sure that we can dismiss Neanderthal social strategies quite so readily. Life history difference was a much more sophisticated notion. This is from Eric Trinkhaus, and originally it was because he looked at Neanderthal pelvis remains and was trying to make an argument. We had a male pelvis originally from Kebara. He was trying to make an argument that, well, perhaps Neanderthal females, their pelvises are a different shape. They might be able to give birth later, to have a longer gestation, a longer pregnancy. Those poor Neanderthal mums, like 10 and 11-month pregnancy. And then the Neanderthal offspring would be more advanced and get up and running quicker. That was the argument. Now, it hasn't been at all borne out. We have a clear idea of the birth canal of Neanderthal and how a Neanderthal mother would give birth. There isn't really any difference of a diameter for a Neanderthal birth canal. And we also have good information about the length of weaning, the length of before the first solid foods, and indeed the kind of final stages of weaning. And there really is not a lot of difference between us and Neanderthals. It looks very similar, sort of weaning for beginnings of weaning with solid foods, 6-7 months. I'll talk more about this a little later. And then 2.5 years for final and ending breastfeeding, which is just standard practice for modern human hunter-gatherers. It's just about the same. The only thing that keeps coming up with Neanderthals is that children seem to be on the fast edge of growing up. But fundamentally, life history, when you become sexually mature, when you might have first offspring, when you die, it's not going to be that different. And because we have similar brain sizes, that's what we'd expect. More ideas about, oh, they had less adept hunting strategies. Well, people like, I'll show you a model from people like Will Robrooks, who always contested the idea of Neanderthal inferiority. They were hunting in different environment and ecological conditions. So I don't think that's going to. The idea that it was brawn with the Neanderthals sustaining all these traumas and injuries rather than using their brains. Yeah, it's another one that won't. And the idea that they were cold adapted, but in the face of the late climate variability of the ice ages of 40, 50,000 years ago, suddenly they were falling over from competition with modern humans. It's very hard to understand that because the Neanderthal populations have been through several glacial and interglacial stages, going across terrain from the Atlantic all the way to Siberia and from north of Europe in the tundra all the way down to Arabia. I mean, they're going through so many different climates. They are super adaptable. So it's hard to understand that. But one argument on those lines was by Clive Finlayson, who's the master of the Gibraltar Neanderthals, the guy who's really studied Gibraltar Neanderthals. His argument was that what was really Neanderthal heartland, what was the kind of terrain they loved, was if you think of the Mediterranean type woods, hilly woods, mountains, forests, woods, and mountains, very ecotonally diverse areas. Think across the Pyrenees from Spain, across the Apennines of Italy, the mountains of Greece, the Balkans, the Caucasus. That was really the heartland for Neanderthals, according to Finlayson. And Finlayson was then saying, well, when just at the time, about 40,000 or just over 40,000 years, when modern humans were coming into Europe, the climate shifted in a way that that type of terrain was dying back, and the big open steppe tundra was opening up, and that favored modern humans much more. And we'll say in a minute just exactly why. One of the other crazy models which has been discussed and written up recently has been the sort of all-on warfare, Neanderthal versus modern human warfare. And I haven't even put it up here because it's kind of a bit crazy. Neanderthals, like modern humans, are mobile, 40,000 years ago, the Upper Paleolithic, are mobile hunter-gatherers. And mobile hunter-gatherers do not line up against each other to fight it out in any sense. So yeah, that isn't, Neanderthals, particularly if they had somewhat smaller populations and smaller, less dense populations, would have simply melted away. They would have found somewhere to go. They knew those terrains. They wouldn't have stood and fought. I'm not saying there were never ever violent conflicts or some kind of fisticuffs, but it's just not going to be a lineup of armies of any kind or description. I think the guy who was writing that article recently actually doesn't even research humans. He researches lizards or something. So it was a pretty shoddy little piece. Okay, so what kinds of, if this sort of emphasis on Neanderthals being the cognitively deficient, having some sort of lack, is not what we. Why is it we who are here and they aren't in the same sense? What sort of models do we want that will help? Oh, I was going to show something about complex behaviors as well. I need to hurry up a bit because we're going to run out of time. Since that time, I mean, what we really want is to envisage strategic variability. We want to look at differences in environment, differences in morphology and bodies that's going to change, differences in energetics for Neanderthals compared to modern humans. And there are those differences, which will lead to all kinds of differences. But now that we are aware of Neanderthal standing in relation to modern human ancestry, since the bad old days that I was talking about of the human revolution assuming modern human superiority, there's been a lot more emphasis and a real shift of emphasis to examination of the kind of complex behaviors that Neanderthals are producing, including very sophisticated control and use of fire and temperatures in producing resins, glues that would be used for creating tars and glues that would be used for creating composite tools or weapons, requiring a lot of temperature control of fire to do that. Then people have in the past suggested Neanderthals had the most kind of rough and ready old hides that they wore as clothes, and their clothes weren't very good at keeping out the cold. But now we're discovering the sophisticated reach of their leather working with these lissoirs as a particular type of bone tool. So bone tool making was supposed to be something that didn't occur until modern humans of the Upper Paleolithic, but that of course is now well disproved. With Neanderthals upwards of before any modern humans arrived, showing these bone working tools for softening and creating leather, very complex leather clothing. Calling it mortuary behaviors, we're talking about the whole realm of Neanderthal burials. the reason for using kind of neutral terminology there is to not make assumptions about the Neanderthal interface with the symbolic domain. Is it symbolic behavior necessarily? But there is a real reassessment going on of what is happening with Neanderthal burials at sites like Shanida in Iraq, the Kurdish region of Iraq, and La Ferracie, for instance, recent papers on that material. And that there really are some very interesting aspects to it, though whether it's going to come up with interesting aspects to the ways in which Neanderthals are ceremonially disposing of corpses, whether it is coming up with a sort of symbolic aspect, we don't know. But I am focused mainly here on the issue of symbolic artifacts and behaviors and the mounting evidence that we have for those behaviors. So that's really what I'm going to try to compare is what there is with modern humans, or our understanding of modern humans, with Neanderthal symbolic record. We have very, very little left for, little so far to show for Denisovans. So we're ranging from types of Neanderthal monuments, the famous Bruniquel, I'll show you that, a little bit of Bruniquel. I'm mainly going to focus on pigments. I don't know if we've got Ian here tonight to help me because he did this work with me. The comparative record of the African pigment record versus the Eurasian pigment record. That is really my main focus. A range of Neanderthal jewelry going from the famous raptor claws and defeathered, possible feathered raptor claws, and all the way to the Châtelperronian fox teeth, by way of the shell jewelry that Neanderthals were producing even earlier than modern humans were. Plus examples potentially of rock painting and engravings. So there is just a shift of understanding of the complexities of Neanderthal behavior. We can see reflected in this changing imagery as we move from the old style depictions of the dark and furry Marcel Boule type drawings of the Neanderthals through the very sophisticated now, the Italian Neanderthals with their feather, raptor claw jewelry and the pigment applications, the Natural History Museum over on the right, sculpture of the older Neanderthal, this old man Neanderthal, and a rather romantic depiction of Shanidar flower burial, which is of course not probably flower burial, down below. So the images are changing, and they're changing as well because female Neanderthals are starting to become depicted more. And a lot of what I'm saying is going to reference the female Neanderthals. This beautiful image of the Neanderthal girl from Tom Björklund's lovely prehistoric reconstructions and paintings. And up on the top right, the Saint-Césaire woman with the rather reddish hair, fair pigment, which is not necessarily the pigment that all Neanderthals had, because of course we have Neanderthals over such a wide range of territory. So there may have been a great range of skin and hair color, in fact. Okay, let me just keep going. I'm going to skip my model for Robrooks and Verpoort to keep the time a little better. But Robrooks and Verpoort were trying to work models that were avoiding the idea of, well, Neanderthals were just not good enough. They were just, just inferior. Instead, they were looking at the difference of Neanderthal bodies in terms of energetics. I'm going to say more about this. Neanderthals are heavier, but they have shorter limbs. That means they're not really going to want to travel as far in a day journey length at all as, say, modern humans with their rather long legs. So they're going to use their space differently. And that means they're going to build campsites differently. And that means they're going to have a different emphasis in terms of hunting skills compared to the production of weaponry and tools. So there's going to be all sorts of outcomes from that, of comparisons between what do Neanderthal tools look like or modern human tools look like. So this is the kind of strategic model of why there would be difference between our different populations. Okay, so I'm going to go now to our particular model. When I'm saying our, this model came all the way from my PhD work that was done with Leslie Aiello and another postgraduate, Catherine Arthur, And we originally made a paper around this Neanderthal model, and subsequently I resurrected that work because we came across some extraordinary material from Volker Sommer, who's just recently retired as professor of evolutionary anthropology at UCL. And Volker is a great expert of Langur monkeys. And he had some extraordinary stuff on Langur monkey variability and seasonal reproduction that was relevant for us for discussing Neanderthals. So I'm going to just introduce first the basic principle underlying the model, the very basic principles, which is about reproductive synchrony. So what you're looking at is a bunch of females here who are showing, females are effectively clocks. They are fertile only at certain times. And these females are showing different times. They're out of synchrony, reproductively asynchronous or desynchronized. Now, when that happens in that situation, and we're talking about, well, almost any mammal or almost any breeding species, but particularly primates, this is true. When that happens, you've got your males here. And amongst these males, say there's one male who's particularly dominant and able to fight off or get access before the others. Well, that guy is very easily able to pick these females off like one by one. So he's here getting, that female is just about fertile, so he's doing the job. And then the next one's going to come round and he's going to do the job with her. And then the next one comes around, he does the job with her. And these guys don't get a look in. Okay, so if these females actually do want more help, or they want something from these guys, they want to keep those guys hanging around for whatever reason, they do that. And as soon as they do that, we can't even tell who's the dominant male anymore, but the dominant male doesn't actually get any better chances than anybody else. So this is a classic feature in primate mating systems. The more you have reproductive synchrony, that there is overlap of fertile periods amongst the females, the more males you get into the system. And basically, if you don't have this synchrony, the likelihood is you can have harems. The dominant male can dominate a harem. Okay, let's actually see this data in a primate system. This is wild chimps. And I'm just going to take you through this because this really shows how it works. Synchrony affects the reproductive success of the males. Reproductive skew means the difference of reproductive success of, these are top rank male there. And look at the, wow, all the reproductive success is like 90% of the fitness of the group of, out of the whole group is going to male number one. And that is in the situation where there's just one or two females in estrus at the same time. And notice that number two male, the big rival of number one, he doesn't even get anything. Number three male gets a little portion of fitness because he's probably the ally of number one. More females come into the system with estrus, and suddenly look what happens, wham. 1, 2, 3, and even more than top rank 3 get some fitness. They're getting a chance of reproduction. Okay, so this is a very, very significant parameter in mating systems. All right. Now, what we found, what Volker talked to us about with his monkeys was extraordinary case. The langurs are these temple monkeys, the Hanuman langurs that are very well known on the Indian subcontinent. And Volker was very familiar with work on two main langur populations, one in Nepal, one in Jodhpur in India. Now, Jodhpur is very dry, very arid, and it would be a seasonal environment, except that the monkeys in Jodhpur, particularly the females, get a lot of provisions because they're sacred to the god Hanuman, and they get provisions from the worshippers. So what happens is the females, instead of being seasonal, as we might expect, become non-seasonal. They distribute their births all through the year and becoming fertile all through the year. By contrast with that, the monkeys in Nepal had seasonal reproduction, very tied into the rains. So when the rains came and food was available, they would start fertile cycles. this meant that the monkey groups in these two places were totally different. In Nepal, they had multi-males. Many males come into the group because there's reproductive synchrony there. But in Jodhpur, a single male, a harem male, would rule the roost. The females were, they put up with that harem male. But what was particularly interesting was that the sexual signals of these, this is the same species of monkey, but they were varying their sexual signals in these different situations. So in both populations, the monkeys hid any sign of ovulation. They didn't give a sign of ovulation. But Langur females can be very proceptive. They extended their sexual receptivity in the seasonal population. Whereas in the non-seasonal one, they completely desynchronized, and they had very short spaces of time, a few days, when they were actually sexually active. Most interesting of all was the monkeys of the seasonal group. They did not show any menstruation. So not only no ovulation, but not even menstruation, nothing. Whereas they have menstruation in the Jodhpur group. Now, what is that doing? This very short period of sexual activity showing menstruation is actually giving the dominant male a clue that the female is going to be fertile. So they're kind of cueing the dominant male, lining up in a queue to be ready for his attentions. Whereas what's happening here is the females are confusing the males entirely. They're not showing any information that the males can use. So they are confusing male knowledge of who's actually the daddy. And that means that more of the subordinates may have chances of mating. Now, what that does for the females is it removes the risk of infanticide. And infanticide is a terrible big risk for Langur females. In fact, infanticide does happen in this Jodhpur population considerably, because if the harem male loses his place, another male comes in, that other male is going to kill the babies of the first male. And he'll carry on killing until he's pretty damn sure that the babies are his. Okay, so there's a kind of trade-off of benefits here for the Jodhpur females, that on the one hand, they don't have so many males eating their food supplies because the males are competition for the female food, but they suffer infanticide. So there's different trade-offs in these two populations. Now, we were thinking hard about Neanderthals and modern humans and wondering how, this extraordinary thing that there was physiological difference in the sexual signals within the same population, and could that have any actual applications for our Neanderthal modern human problem? Now, Ian last week was showing you the key difficulty for, I've got to accelerate. I'm sorry, I'm going to go so long here. I'm going to try and make this in 20, 25 minutes, Chris. Is that okay? I'm covering.
Yeah, but don't rush, Camilla. I mean, we're all very interested. It's very important. Don't rush too much.
Okay, so it's about making it understandable, because it's quite a complicated model with the seasonal repro seasonality and these different species. We're looking at brain size, 2 million years, big jump. Homo erectus, we've seen this brain size chart quite a long time. This enormous increases, exponential rates of increases will open up the later stage of that brain chart in a minute. Modern humans and Neanderthals pretty much overlapping in terms of their range of brain size. We've said it so many times that the energetics of this producing these very large-brained offspring, the story of how females did that is really the fundamental inside story of human evolution. And it's clear that that story is going to be as big a job for Neanderthals as modern humans. We'll check that that is the case. So, okay, we've argued that human female, our sexual signals as we have our bodies today, have evolved in part to support and contribute to this problem of how do females get this extra energy. So I'm just doing a resume on our kind of basic model here before we start to think about the Neanderthals. We've concealed ovulation and we have continuous receptivity. Now it so happens that that is pretty similar to the langur monkeys. And there may be pretty similar reasons we are scrambling information to males about when exactly we are fertile. You know, men are not good at telling when women are fertile. They're not. This means we are well designed, just like the langurs, for confusing the possibility. You know, we give males encouragement that they are likely to be the daddy, but we also confuse their knowledge about it. We're very well designed for that. And it's very probable that this is an old-time feature of Homo lineage because it's first of all a counter-infanticide strategy before it then may be supporting pair bonds, the stability of pair bonds subsequently. So this could be a very old feature. But for sure, we menstruate copiously, and we menstruate a lot more than langur monkeys do. And Neanderthals similarly must menstruated. There's absolutely no reason to think they wouldn't have been menstruating in the same sort of copious quantity as we do. I'm not going to go into, I haven't got time to go into the questions of evolution of menstruation. But the point is that we've made a number of times, if ovulation is not there, and there is no good way for males to tell the moment of fertility, menstruation is left as a significant, a salient cue for males that a female is not pregnant, and that means that she can be made pregnant in the near future, not right then, but soon. Okay, so we saw with the langur population that the langurs in the harems were actually signaling with menstruation to let males know about their prospective fertility. So there's evidence that this is true. Okay, so this is with modern humans, and this is the cosmetic coalition model that we were talking about with Ian last week. Menstruation now becomes the difficult signal. It's not a signal of ovulation, but it is something that's telling males amongst a group of females who are pregnant or breastfeeding, a menstruating female is the one that in 2 weeks' time, a week or two's time, she's going to be fertile. All those females will be concerned about the possibility of competition. All those males will be concerned about the possibility of competition. So this scenario may have played out in many different ways, but the more that brain size goes upwards, as we saw on that chart, the more that females are really needing to get support from the efforts of these males. They do not want competition between those males over that menstruating female. So they want to grab hold of her and make sure they keep hold of her. She's probably their relative, their young relative anyway. And then they've basically got two strategies. They've got a strategy that they try and hide it, which is like concealed ovulation. But what we think happened and was very significant in the emergence of symbolic culture for modern humans was that females did the absolute opposite of hide it, that they began to display it in collectively appropriated ways. They were displaying this idea of blood or fertility as a means of kind of confusing the males again. But it isn't so much confusion as what that strategy does is it resists any dominant male from trying to get to that potential fertile female. So what it is actually is equalizing reproductive success amongst the males and creating a solidarity amongst the males who are willing to be investors. So that's our basic cosmetic coalitions model. Now, we're now going to ask, this may be a bit complicated. I've got to say something about the seasonality. We're now going to ask, well, why wouldn't that model apply also to Neanderthals? Surely it would. they're experiencing just as much of that brain size increase. They're experiencing just as much, the Neanderthal women, just as much of the energy difficulties, if not more so. We've shown that it's more so than modern human women. So, okay, this is just to reference some of the old models that we did together, myself with Catherine Arthur and Leslie, we were particularly looking at seasonality of reproductive synchrony. So seasonality was what counted with the Langer monkeys that completely transformed. If they were seasonal in their reproduction, there were multi-males in the group. If they were non-seasonal, one male could guard all the females. And I did this playing with models in my PhD to look at modeling females over interbirth intervals, the time period of their cycling, and let loose males into these computer models so the males would compete to access cycling females. Now, the whole point of this switch from the random, so that's a random pattern where the computer's just dictated where the onset of fertility is over certain periods. There's infant mortality in this model with hunting, gathering parameters, etc. Compared to that, there's a seasonal pattern where females basically overlap their cycles at a certain time of the year. Now, what the difference in this model was, for a random pattern, any dominant male, he would just go from female to female to female, and it never paid him to stay in one place. It just didn't pay. He would get so much fitness, there was no point. Even if the offspring were very likely to die, we raised infant mortality to ridiculous levels. And even then, it was no use. But as soon as they went to a seasonal pattern, you know, once a male has kind of been in consort and made this female pregnant, well, he's kind of got nowhere to go. There's nowhere there. There's nobody else. So he might as well hang around. And then he kind of might as well hang around a bit longer too. And what this does was just tipped the balance of those high-ranked males who just don't want to invest into beginning to do that little bit of extra. So basically, seasonality changes everything for that non-investor type of male. Okay. So now we started to think, okay, well, what about Neanderthals? Because surely Neanderthals in the Ice Ages, particularly, would be experiencing something that began to resemble that bottom seasonal type of model. So what about our Neanderthals? Okay, I'm really rushing through here. It won't take another 15, 20 minutes. I really rushed through. First of all, just a quick glimpse of the type of symbolic material that we're beginning to get for Neanderthals, a real quick glimpse just to strengthen your conviction that Neanderthals were singing, dancing, and shamanizing. They were engaging in symbolic domains. This is one of the most mysterious, this Neanderthal monument in Bruniquel of a date 176 Ka. These are built up walls. It's not exactly a Neanderthal Stonehenge because it would have taken hours or a day or two to create these stalagmites, but they've broken stalagmites and created walls into special shapes with particular positions of piles. There are two of these elliptical walled rings. This is a cave down in south of France. It's in a space that is a very inaccessible space. It's away from living space, and it's very dark, and it would become very smoky very quickly. So there is something going on there that we really can't describe, but it's something very ritualistic, something that kind of bears resemblance to what Ian Watts would talk about with Van der Werk in the Northern Cape, which is quite a lot older than this, we should say. Okay, I'll come back on that date of Bruniquel because it's pretty significant. Another famous piece from Hungary, Central Europe, around about 100,000 years old, a beautiful mammoth and elephant molar, which has been polished. It's been polished really tarnished with red ochre. So we're going to come back to the question of pigments with the ochre there. The selection here for, this is Comme Renard, but there's a selection of these famous, it becomes quite a consistent Neanderthal trait to find these eagle or raptor bird talons, which have been defleshed, the feathers perhaps used for extra ornament, which are seen with cut marks. And we also have examples where they have pigments seen with cut marks to have potentially been on strings or necklaces, as was being modeled here by the North Italian Suave Neanderthal there. And here is this collection, an extraordinary collection. So that's, I think this is an Italian Neanderthal, but here is this extraordinary collection of pigmented cockle pectin shells from caves in southeast Spain of Murcia. Now I'm going to come back on these considerably because there's been a lot of discussion about the dating of these shells. But at the time that they were being discovered, also in 2010, it was a very significant discovery of symbolic artifacts assigned to Neanderthals at that date, at that time, Cueva Anton, Cueva de los Aviones, pigments on the shells. Now, of course, the modern humans have pigmented shells down in Blombos, as well as other parts of Africa. But we're going to come back on those shells because their dating has changed. So that's just another view of that material. Fumane, the northern Italian site, produces another beautiful little ochre shell container, a mollusk shell, a tiny little fossil, which was like a little pot for makeup, red makeup or cosmetic ochre, which you can see kind of replaced, and may have been strung, again, shells on strings. And then this late material from Mousterian Pêche de la Mousterian Neanderthal industry with abraded crayons. Now the black material is manganese dioxide, manganese. And then we've got this beautiful Shackleperonian jewelry, fox teeth jewels, ivory and so forth in Shackleperonian sites. That's French sites, very late at the stage of contact with modern humans. Okay. Now I was not even going to include this slide because there's quite a lot of controversy over the issues of Neanderthal rock painting, use of ochre paints applied to rock surfaces, and whether the dating on this is going to stand up. There is also a Western fixation that belongs to us weird people about, you know, the real mark of the symbolic culture is that you can put drawings on walls. But there are, of course, many cultures that never do that. The first place to paint will be bodies. So we can expect the Neanderthal pigment record to be telling us about that before. But we have these potential dates, and there's another site. These are Spanish sites from La Pasiega, the north, Matravesa, the center of Spain, and right down Ardales is another example, right in the deep south, Malaga. Gorham is definitely a correct dating of Neanderthal site of Gibraltar, with this extraordinary rock engraving that would have taken significant amount of work by Neanderthal to create. So we are seeing this kind of material too on the cave walls. Right, let's just see how we can apply the cosmetic coalitions hypothesis to Neanderthals, and I'll try and wind it up as quickly as I can and bring it through quite quick, I hope. But we are needing to compare the Neanderthal pigment record to the modern human pigment record, and that's what we're going to try and do. The basic principles for the female cosmetic coalitions hypothesis, the main predictions that we have are that, whoops, oh sorry, I've got to do it here. The main predictions, the first evidence of symbolic strategies when females produce their picket line saying no, and producing a collective representation of blood or fertility that is resisting any inappropriate male sexual advance. it should be a cosmetics industry that's focused on blood red pigments somehow. And that may emerge in kind of two stages, with earlier stages much more ad hoc and sort of very quickly assembled, whereas later stages we can expect habitual ready preparations with pigments already organized. Okay. And we are expecting that to go alongside the pressures of encephalization, which are driving this thing. Let me make clear, we are not saying that symbolism occurs because brain sizes get because bigger brains are more intelligent and create symbolism. What we are saying is that because bigger brains require the energy, females have to create practices, strategies to get that energy. And these are the ritual strategies to do that. That's what we're saying. And we assume that Neanderthals must do that too. We'll leave that last bit. So we're going to expect Neanderthals have some sort of female cosmetic coalition strategy, don't they? Or why wouldn't they? So I'm now looking, I don't know if Ian's come in at all and he's here to help, but anyway, let's just go through this.
He's on strike. He's not here.
Oh, he's on strike. Okay, well, I'll have to take the flak for Ian. So I'll run down quickly Ian's comparison of Africa, and I hope it's reasonably up to date. The pigment record of Africa starts really in the Northern Cape, Kuruman Hill sites like Vanderwerk, the Forest Smith sites, 500 to 300,000 years ago. Ian, with Michael Chesson and Jane Wilkins, have provided that evidence. So it's from more than 300,000 years ago. In East Africa, we're looking, and then Zambia, Twin Rivers, we're looking at that sort of 300, 250,000 years ago of principally red ochre. There's very little else but red ochre, hematite, specularite, we should say as well. And Ian would claim that from 250,000 years ago, somewhere in Africa, there is going to be pigments to show for it, despite the fact that African, compared to Europe, has a less intensive archaeological coverage. And Ian claims that from the time of modern human speciation, 170,000 or so years ago, almost any southern African rock shelter you go into, you will find ochre pigment. It will be there. And of course, ochre, hematite, red ochre it's the hallmark of Homo sapiens. Wherever Homo sapiens goes, the ochre goes with them. And we have claimed the female cosmetic coalitions model to be the basic evolutionary explanation for why that ochre is so fixed, is such a key part. Okay, what about Europe? Eurasia, we could say, but it's basically Europe I'm looking at. It needs urgently an expansion of the record to Asia. The cases are doubtful. There are a couple, but they're very doubtful until from about 300,000. So it's matching to some extent the African record. And then about 250,000 to 220,000 years. We'll show this on some charts in just a minute. And then something funny happens. There's a big gap that substance, like depending where you start from, about 80,000 years of any pigments. And then we start getting it sporadically, pops up here and there, but really it isn't there in any major shape or form until the Mysterian after 60,000. And manganese, the black pigment, becomes quite dominant until the Châtelperronian. The Châtelperronian is when modern humans also come into Europe. And the Châtelperronian, the Neanderthals go mad with ochre. They're knee deep in it. It's really wrong. So there's a really different profile. It's much more sporadic. It doesn't, like the African profile, go like across whole regions. It's in particular populations, perhaps French and Spanish populations, but there are in earlier days quite a spread across Europe, in fact. Okay. So, right. I'm just going to make a comparison of Neanderthal versus modern human brain size. I'm not going to go into detail here, but I'm claiming that there is basically an extremely similar rate of expansion between Neanderthal specimens, fossil specimens with cranial capacity, and African fossil specimens. There doesn't look like there's a big difference there. We've got to remember, if the Neanderthals have very robust bodies, so too did Africans until relatively late in the day. So in terms of the energy requirements of Neanderthals, the brain sizes, they're roughly kind of similar. In terms of Neanderthal body size and shape, though, actually, Neanderthals have greater energetic requirements because their bodies are heavier, stockier. They're significantly heavier than modern humans. And in addition, their shorter limb length means that there will be effects like energy efficiency on locomotion, particularly over longer distances. There are effects of cold adaptation, implying that there should be raised basal metabolic rate. So Neanderthals can be compared to kind of analog populations amongst hunter-gatherers, such as Tierra del Fuego, in very low latitude, high latitude in South America populations with very high energy requirements. And what it adds up to, calculations by Catherine MacDonald from the Leiden School, a conservative estimate that Neanderthals actually need a 10% extra energy budget than modern humans. That is energy per day, extra energy requirements. Now we're going to consider that. Some of these authors have considered that in terms of specifically Neanderthal female energy requirements and examined the difference perhaps of energy deficits for females in like summertime compared to wintertime. And these are remarkable differences of foraging strategies. That's the Roberts Verporter that we were talking about. So now what I'm going to start saying is Neanderthal females particularly would have had very significant energy challenges, particularly during highly seasonal ice age glaciation environments. So severe energetic challenge for Neanderthal female reproduction. Certain times of year, Neanderthal females would have been going into energy deficits that meant they couldn't possibly be fertile or conceiving. Okay. Now, what I'm using there as comparison, these charts are actually seasonal profiles of birth from bush-living Jungquasi from Southern Africa. They're hunter-gatherer populations in Southern Africa. But what we're suggesting for Neanderthal females is that they would have at least equivalent of this kind of like within 4, 5, 6 months is the majority of births, implying within that time period, the majority of conceptions by all the women of these groups. And a very low dearth of any births or conceptions in a corresponding period here. So Neanderthal females must be showing a very seasonal profile that implies a reproductive synchrony. They're increasing, overlapping reproductive cycles as a result of that. So I'm comparing that to the Jungquasi scenario there. So suppose we've got a contrast of interglacial cycles. Neanderthal females have profiles at least this seasonal, something of that nature, with the births happening, it'll be different months, in the births happening, say, middle of summer, with deep late winter as the time period of the greatest energy deficit, possible periods of real nutritional stress. The stress would take the form of lack of animal fats, just as because the animals would not be bearing fat in those deep winter conditions, just as Ian was talking about last week. Compared to that, a profile which would be in non-seasonal conditions, where there's pretty much distribution all around the year. Well, we're saying that the difference between that and that makes a difference to Neanderthal male strategies. Neanderthal males, in those conditions, the top males, they just can't run around. But in these conditions, yes, they can. That was the message of the original model we developed. So a Neanderthal male in the very seasonal type of ice age, glacial stage, is very unlikely to really be able to have sex, to make babies or to raise babies with more than one female at a time. But it's what we call a seasonal thermostat model, a seasonality thermostat model. During the ice ages, males are kind of corralled. They don't have anywhere to go. They're basically kind of constrained to pretty stable pair bonding. But what happens if there is a switch from the deeply seasonal patterns of glaciations into significantly climate change interglacial phases? You lose the very cold climate, goes straight into very warm phases. Do the Neanderthal females lose the strong seasonality effects? Do they then need to pursue strategies to resist dominant male attempts to monopolize fertility? So that was the basis of this model that we published some 7 years ago now, the Seasonality Thermostat in Paleoanthropology. And what I want to do is just show briefly the results and update some latest information on what's happened with that model, because we still think it has legs. So, okay, just to mention some of the actual evidence on Neanderthal seasonality, seasonality of Neanderthal strategies, seasonality of Neanderthal mobility in the Middle East of the site use compared with modern humans. That was old work of Lieberman and Shea. Seasonality of prey choice by Bocherens. That was, again, old work, and there would be more recent work than this. We don't know what that means in terms of packing down to Neanderthal female energetics. But in this extremely variable climate situation, we're looking at some extraordinary work, recent work here by Tanya Smith on 250,000-year-old, Tanya Smith and her colleagues on 250,000-year-old infants' milk teeth from the Rhone Valley Neanderthals, where they are counting the incremental growth of these tiny milk teeth of these little Neanderthal juveniles who die very young, showing wintertime stress patterns, serious lack of nutrition during wintertime, and then also showing birth of one individual being timed on a springtime basis, and the weaning, the final weaning of that individual 2.5 years later in the autumn. So this would be these are living end of a glaciation. So this would be glacial cycle, kind of seasonal reproductive profile. So the timetable which fits a modern human hunter-gatherer timetable would be birth in the springtime. The mother has got pregnant the previous summer once she's good and fat. And then 2.5 years later, she's already pregnant again from that summer 2 years, 2 years later. And in the autumn, she'll be weaning. She will wean that little infant to become a Neanderthal child. And then, of course, that child faces real wintertime stress, which may prove fatal. That would be the kind of seasonal profile it would be. Another sensational aspect of Neanderthal strategies as seasonal strategies is the story being told about the Atapuerca hominins, the Cima de los Huesos hominins I showed at the beginning, where they're suggesting that those hominins who were living right at the end of a deep glaciation were actually going into some form of hibernation. And the Batsiocas and Aswagas suggesting this because of examining that amazing collection of bones and finding evidence of, well, fundamentally it's rickets, chronic kidney disease, mineral bone disorder. Rickets occurs because lack of vitamin D. Vitamin D lack for Neanderthals means they are not getting animal fats. Deep glacial winters of that time period, late winters, and animals may not have any fats. These guys are hiding it out in a cave with hypermetabolic, very low metabolic rates. It's one of the mysteries of Atapuerca. Why are so many teenagers dying? The teenagers will be under such stress because they are the ones that are under pressure for growing it through puberty, but yet they're faced with rickets and chronic bone disorders and winter starvation. So that is, I mean, that just really says something about the extent of seasonality. We're not even talking about reproduction in those conditions whatsoever. All right, I'm now going to just take you very quickly on the actual ice ages to show what were the results of our proposal. Our proposal is that the white bits are the glaciations. That's where Atapuerca winter starvation, that deep dip over towards the left-hand side, if you can see that, that is the deep glaciation of the glacial stage number 12. The dark bits are the glacial cycles. And we've written in here in big red, the big red is, I mean, these are small samples of possible ochre pigment here, maybe in an Italian site, but that's very old. Possible here, again, interglacial.
Camilla, can you just say the black bits are the interglacials and the whites
the black bits are the interglacials, the white bits are white, think ice, and the black bits are dark, no ice, okay? Right, we really have something at Maastricht. These are questionable, these early ones, but Maastricht Belvedere is a site with a beautiful red hematite brought in from a considerable transport distance, and of the order of a bit above 300,000. Then we have a collection, a number of sites, central Germany, Central Europe, MIS7 in the order after 242 to 200,000. Now, then we have this, remember the find gap? This big dip of cold, the MIS, the menisotope, the glacial cycle, MIS6. There is a tiny bit from Comgrenal, but that's like all the ochre, between all this ochre here to show for it. Now I'm going to blow up this part for you. Let me just say something, Bruniquel, the extraordinary site of Bruniquel, because Bruniquel is coming here, somewhere here, and it actually comes in just a warm blip of that glacial cycle. Bruniquel is showing something about Neanderthals engaging a symbolic domain, that's for sure. And I can't explain what, but Bruniquel kind of gives a pause for thought because it comes in a warm bit and it's right in the beginning of this big gap. And then it highlights the fact that Neanderthals were, they're coming from symbolic strategies here. They were engaging in the symbolic domain. And then suddenly there's nothing there. Where is it? It could be visibility, but okay, we're not. Okay, notice that that really warm bit. We're going to say more here on 5E because 5E becomes really important and interesting. Okay. Another diagram from our book is we were tracking through the ochre sequences of two sites in France, Comgrenal and Piche de la Zée, because we could correlate those layers with climate indicators. Okay, that's the Tartar plaque. Notice the peaks is where it's warmer. Notice bit of ochre, Piche de la Zée, oh, it's warmer. Okay, this is the warm bits of MIS5. Now we're going into the really cold bit of CIS4, of MIS5, OIS4. Glaciation, not much ochre. It's disappeared from Comgrenal. We've got some manganese. The black is manganese. I should say that manganese almost surely is a pigment, but it may start being used because it's used as a fire starter and it's correlating to that very cold phase. Comgrenal again, warm bits. Piche de la Zée, lots and lots of manganese. Châtelperronian, lots and lots of ochre. That's when the modern humans are coming. I'm suggesting that here, the Neanderthals may be, at least these French Neanderthals may be breaking free of climate constraints. They've kind of come onto a cultural ratchet effect of engaging with cosmetics at any situation. Now, what I've left out of this chart is the Eemian, the very, very warm bit, which is right in the top right-hand corner. I didn't put it into that date. Let me just show you the picture of the Eemian on the ice core pattern. That's the very cold late MAS6, and whoosh, the Eemian is 2 to 4 degrees warmer than we are today. There were hippopotamuses in Yorkshire and Trafalgar Square up here. So if there is any time period when Neanderthals should switch, should be under an incredibly stressful switch of adaptation from very deep cold into extraordinary change of climatic conditions, where females might be readily, expected to shift to a different reproductive profile, it is the Eemian. And we said we didn't have much to show. We just said, well, there isn't anything there. We don't understand it, but there's nothing there. And we said this in our paper. We said, well, why isn't there anything there? Okay, well, that's the major update that I have to share, is that the beautiful shell materials from Murcia, southeastern Spain, the Cueva de los Aviones, are now redated bang into the Eemian. Now, if we consider this sample to be something equivalent to the pigmented shells and also possibly strung shells and cosmetic kits of Blombos down in South Africa of the modern humans, well, they are now about 20,000 years earlier than Blombos. Okay, this is Neanderthals on the cutting edge. Right, I'm now going to show you the one little bit of possible Denisovan material right the way over the other side from the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, right the way over to China, central China, at a site called Lingjing in Henan province. Again, the date bang into the Eemian, right, sort of centered on the end of the Eemian. And we have these two beautiful mammal ribs that have been engraved and covered in a rich hematite. Okay. Now, the thing to say about Lingjing is there are two crania, two skulls, one of which is literally the biggest fossil skull ever. It's 1800 cc. Now, it could be 1800 cc skull at this date is just, it's just out of orbit. And so at this date, the biggest modern humans are Skull and Calf, say like 1500, 1600 cc. We're talking that sort of difference in capacity. Now, the skulls could be Denisovan, but they could also still be Neanderthals gone all the way into China. It's a possibility that that's true. But so what we have at Lingjing is the encephalization, extraordinary, the shift into a completely different, probably disrupted seasonal profile because of the shift of climate, and an indubitably symbolic artifact that compares again to the engraved ochres from Blombos, from the southern African site of Blombos, as modern human examples. Okay, there's one other site, Krapina, Croatia, Eemian, with eagle talon materials considered to be possibly a necklace with pigmentation, both red and both yellow. I should have said that the Murcian sample has red and yellow pigments, a complex cosmetic paint kit. I'm not going to say more about this all here. Let me just try and finish off quickly because I've gone far too long again. Yeah, so where previously we were not able to show any materials of the Eemian period where we pointed to, that should be the time. The Eemian was not a cakewalk. It was tough because there was a huge switch for Neanderthals, ecological turmoil, climate turmoil, and almost surely big social turmoil. Just think about how if females were changing their seasonal reproductive profile, that then threatens the mating system, the social system. It threatens all kinds of stability. So all of these signals of symbolic artifacts that we're now beginning to find in the Eemian, and in fact, the female cosmetic strategy itself, they are signals of social stress. They're costly signals of resistance to and overcoming possible social conflict. So my main suggestion for further testing on this model is to really focus on there's about 30 odd Eemian sites across Europe that would be applicable. There are some Middle Eastern sites of this time period, including Tabun, for instance, that there should be more stuff to find there. I virtually finished. Okay, I'll go quickly over that. Just remembering that the langurs were physiologically capable of hiding menstruation when it suited them. In the case of cultural symbolic humans, the humans going through their symbolic revolutions, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, ourselves, we should have been able to hide menstruation if we needed by cultural means. We wouldn't have had to wait for physiological developments there. So this is the picture of the divergence of strategies for the Middle Pleistocene human lineages of the different lineages. All of them are experiencing this pressure of encephalization. Dominant males will try strategies, they will try if they can, to find the menstrual cues that tell them which females are going to be fertile, but the non-cycling females are going to produce resistance to that. They're not going to like that at all. And then it depends, the divergence depends if the environment forces seasonal reproduction, which would be Neanderthals in the Ice Ages, when really the Neanderthals need to suppress menstrual signals. They don't want the menstrual signals really, that just risks disruption. So somehow hide them. By contrast with that, and this really is talking about the African equatorial populations, but also Neanderthals when it got into very warm phases, non-seasonal reproduction, the best strategy is confuse the menstrual signals, amplify them, elaborate them, and use them as these signals, these costly signals of resistance. So the main message is Neanderthals, in terms of their symbolic cultural strategies, were going through these stop. They started, they stopped, they started, they stopped. They had these breaks of the cold periods, and particularly the MIS6, which kind of covered their trait. They lost the traditions, or they covered up the traditions, or they removed the traditions. So we're saying that's a potential model for beginning to understand both why there are evident symbolic artifacts and symbolic engagement by Neanderthal and I'm sure Denisovan populations, but why there doesn't seem to be the same consistency and steady increase of symbolic behaviors as there are amongst modern humans. Okay, thank you very much for listening. That's an awful lot to deal with. I'm sorry it took so long. Okay, let's stop sharing and we can go back to anybody who's got some questions. Okay. Are we good? Right. Probably stunned everyone into silence there.
Just point out that science is supposed to do this kind of thing. You're in real science, you're supposed to have a theoretical model, and it makes rather odd, improbable predictions, quite detailed predictions. So a very good scientific model is one which is vulnerable, highly vulnerable. You should find all sorts of evidence which completely demolishes the theory. But when you have very improbable predictions, but it turns out that they're accurately matched by the evidence, you're onto something. And as far as I know, this is actually the only model of the Neanderthals in relationship to modern humans, which actually makes difficult predictions, which you then have to test, and which in particular seems to have come up trumps especially with the check with that check date. I'm not saying.
Yeah, I mean, we be modest, be humble about it. We tested it in a couple of long sequence French sites. There are plenty of gaping holes, and I'm sure people with their questions can point to some of the gaping holes.
Just making the model about falsifiability, that's all.
Yeah, that's fine. We're sticking our necks out. We're saying, well, I am on Ian's behalf. I don't know if he would. Go and look at the 30 Eemian sites across Europe and the Middle East and find more stuff, and it'll be there. That's our prediction. Any questions?
It's important that everyone understands the argument. It is a bit unfamiliar. So does anyone want anything clarified from Camilla?
or want to talk about any other aspect of Neanderthals that I couldn't bring out here. I was hoping there were going to be some Neanderthal experts here. I mean, there may well be some Neanderthal experts here. I was hoping Matt might come, and Ian's not here, which I'm not impressed by, but I'm sure he's got parenting excuses. Oh, Jerome's go, Jerome.
Hi, thank you, Camilla, for that wonderful and very elegant exposition of a really remarkable set of bits of evidence to really, to reinforce for me anyway, the whole cosmetic coalitions model. But there's a sort of hidden element to what you're saying, which, I mean, and this is from, of course, a very ignorant perspective, but one which, the implication of what these discoveries and your framing of them is that, of course, the real hero of the human story is not the Neanderthals, it's not the Denisovans, it's not Homo sapiens, it's something else. So who is that something else?
Oh, you're implying that common ancestor.
Well,
is that what you mean?
If we're seeing the same strategies with the same symbolic behaviors in so many different cases, Denisovans, Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, the implication is that it's much older than any of them.
Okay, I disagree. I'm saying that there are symbolic revolutions running in the same kind of trajectory amongst Neanderthals, amongst modern humans, and amongst Denisovans. And that antecessor, if that is, an antecessor is like 700, 800, antecessor is not yet so encephalized. And the pressure that is driving this, even Homo heidelbergensis is not quite that, it's just beginning to step under that level of encephalization. And the pressure that's driving these strategies is the energetic pressure on females of encephalization. So I'm not sure that antecessor or heidelbergensis necessarily do some of this. It depends what you call heidelbergensis. If we call the Van der Werk people an African version of heidelbergensis, then I agree. Those guys are the first that we really have evidence for doing this. But I don't think antecessor necessarily. We don't have a good grip on the brain size from that specimen, Grandolina, and that's a sub-adult anyway. But if I would agree with you, if we are finding larger brained already at that earlier stage. So can we see the difference here between that? That I'm saying it's a process, it's a strategic process, and it can happen independently on those different lineages. Yep. I'm sure lots of people will dispute and be on your side, but I'm sticking to my guns. It's a great question. Yes, Rosalie's saying convergent evolution is basically the humans are meeting similar but not always the same conditions, and they're doing things are panning out in similar but not always the same ways. That's it. We got somebody else?
Okay. Can I ask about infanticide? Because right. You're talking about infanticide being the driver for the Langer monkeys in concealing in concealing ovulation.
Yeah. Yes.
But where does infanticide fit in the Homo genus? And I mean, how far back does that go? And is that a driver for the concealing of the ovulation too? I'm a bit confused about that.
Okay, so in great apes, gorillas, orangs, and the ancestry of us and chimpanzees, infanticide is likely to, I mean, amongst most primate species, like half primate species, there are always serious risks of infanticide because infants are so vulnerable. If a male does not know, I mean, I'm sorry, if a male knows he is not the daddy, he's a risk. If he has just a smidgen of a chance of being the daddy, he's not a risk. Okay, even if he's just mated the female once, that's enough. So female primates develop these strategies of confusing males by making sure they mate some male who may become a top rank and dangerous male. Great apes, I think the great ape general default pattern is to be fairly concealed on ovulation, because gorillas and orangs are not advertising ovulation, and the reason is good one. They want to be able to confuse males. Chimps and bonobos have gone down a different branch where they are basically trying to have sex with almost every male in the, they do it by having sex with everybody. And that confuses it. So they do it with these very big sexual signals, the graded signals. That does concentrate paternity onto top males, but it gives lots of other males a chance too. So it's deep. The counter-infanticide strategy is deep in hominin lineage. I'd be surprised if any hominin really didn't have it as a counter-infanticide strategy. So I don't know, does that help answer it? What is there more that I can bring out on that? It isn't a contentious position, the counter-infanticide, that concealment of ovulation amongst primates links to situations where infanticide is a risk. That is not a contentious position, it's the general finding. Yeah. So I'm just saying that Homo will already have concealed ovulation long time back. It's not going to be, it's not that Homo sapiens suddenly developed concealed ovulation and that Homo erectus, for instance, had big signals of ovulation. That isn't the way it would operate, I'm sure.
But so, like, is Homo ancestral? Are they having to think about infanticide, or is it
very probably? I mean, listen. Humans today have to think. Women today have to think about infanticide. So I'm pretty damn sure Homo ancestral had to. Infanticide hasn't really gone away. Hunter-gatherers, it's an incredibly rare. It depends. African hunter-gatherers, I will say, qualify that. Infanticide is just incredibly rare to non-existent. If the only sort of infanticide likely is a mum doing it to her own baby, not a male doing it to another man's baby. Okay, but for hunter-gatherers it doesn't exist. But for African hunter-gatherers it doesn't exist. I should say, qualify that. What was that? Bonobos have stomped on infanticide. They really have sorted it out by stomping on any male violence. But bonobos and African hunter-gatherers are the champions of stopping infanticide. But most of the other hominins and apes in the record almost surely suffer it.
I wonder if I could return to the issue which Jerome raised, because I think I'm now beginning to understand why Jerome's always argued, and I wasn't ever quite sure why, but anyway, argued in favor of the Dedier and Levinson concept when it's been the question of the emergence of language, putting the emergence of language right back to whatever was the, you know, the kind of root of the different lineages we've been talking about. So initially, of course, Heidelbergensis, but now going quite a long way further back. And of course, then saying that because Neanderthals we now assume have language, and we have language, therefore at the very root of that tree, languages in some form must already have emerged. And of course, what you're saying is that there's no reason to assume that at all, is there? You'd be saying because if language depends on a remarkable degree of trust and solidarity, then the FCC needs to come in to do that.
Some version of
seasonality itself isn't really going to get you there. It might help a lot, but it won't.
No. Basically, losing. If seasonality takes the strain instead of ritual practice, you can kind of. I mean, I'm not sure how we need to really think to imagine this. Could a community that was already doing. I mean, come on, what Jerome's saying, Homo erectus will have muaggio, Homo erectus will have intersubjectivity, Homo erectus will have cooperative eyes. So they will have aspects and elements of linguistic going with mimetic performance. So we will potentially have fall back onto something of that nature where you require where you have much more small kind of coalitionary where trust bubbles where you can have that kind of exchange before you have a full-scale divergence of language on the one hand, ritual on the other hand. So if you do pass on the ritual, if you do leave it behind for a certain period, then perhaps you're going to go backwards in terms of some form of linguistic communication. I'm not sure. It really needs thinking about. I totally agree with you, and I appreciate Jerome's points there. But I'm mainly thinking. You've said language is about dealing with a virtual domain. It's about navigating a virtual domain, and if you lose the ritual practice, you kind of shrink that virtual domain away. It isn't part of life. So we could imagine that sort of thing would be happening. If we go back to poor old Steve Mython and his singing Neanderthals model, we do expect that Neanderthals will maintain that kind of emotional bonded singing together stuff. They will have so much to go through in their relatively small groups. Some of them were relatively small and remote groups, that they will retain that sort of bonding. But what we could think of it in terms of Polly Wiesner's idea about firelight talk, where the jeune poissy in the deep dark of the night start shifting their conversations to talk about the people or the ancestors that are far, far away from where they are. And they're starting to talk about the stories of first creation. So Neanderthals might be losing, if they're losing social networks, they might be losing that kind of connection potentially during the deep dark ice ages, if you like. But it's not properly thought through, but there could be a lot more to pull out there.
So I mean, just in a nutshell, you're saying that whereas in Africa our ancestors kept building on the ritual traditions, and therefore
they never fell back.
Any language would have been like, incrementally evolving all the complexities of grammar and just preserving and diversifying.
Yeah,
the Neanderthals. I just want to get yes, yeah. But with the Neanderthals, they kind of had the revolution, lost it, had it, lost it, and all the things which went with the revolution. Every time it was a very severe ice age, even language could have been lost, because if the ritual's lost, because the seasonal synchrony is doing the job for them, then somehow they've got all the capacities for language, but they just yeah, I see.
Sure. I think that works. I mean, recently writing with Ian, he's highlighted the fact that there is a real problem about linking the emergence of language and symbolic culture to speciation in our speciation in Africa about 170,000 years ago, because the archaeologists, they all we can't see anything special happening. There doesn't seem to be any sort of big change that they expect. But Ian just says, things go backwards in Africa as well. They lose certain particular forms of tools like Harrison's port. They gain it, they lose it, they gain it. So it looks very up, down there. But Ian says, but that's not true about ochre. That's not true about pigment. The pigment, it's a bit sporadic, it starts to keep going, and then it takes off, it just goes like that. So it's always progressing, the ochre, which is not like Neanderthals.
We've got 10 minutes till it's 8:30 and we stop.
Oh, I'm sorry, it took so long.
I think you had to take that time, Camilla. I don't think.
It's very hard to.
I think for me that was the most thrilling presentation of this whole model ever. I thought it was really absolutely amazing.
Thank
you. Yeah. I know I'm one of your fans. I know that. Yeah.
Yeah. I did this way back at Göttingen's primate conference, and also at UCL's bio seminar, but 10 or 12 years ago, yeah. Long time. Took away.
Jackie has hand up. Well, I've got Jerome and Jackie. Perhaps Jackie first and then Jerome.
Hello there. I don't think you can see me. My video, I can't start it for some
Hi.
reason, probably because there's so many people. I'm really interested. I love this theory, and I can see it in modern days. Why women are all encouraged to wear red lipstick, blah blah.
Encouraged. We like it. We need it. We want it. It's not
exactly. Yeah, I worked with men for 25 years. Don't wear red lipstick. It's quite amusing. Anyway, moving swiftly along. My question is about the smell of fertility in women. I know I can smell if another woman is menstruating. If I'm in a public loo.
Menstruating.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's about, and I've always been able to do it, and I don't know if it's about, no, there was a point where when I was born in the 60s, and it only became really clear in about the 80s or 90s that I could smell women having a period, and it wasn't all women. And maybe it's because of feminine products that were being sold, or I don't know, but I have this, oh, I can start my video and you can see me blathering on. What about the smell? Can men in the group smell if a woman's having a period? Because that would make some influence on disguising or women gathering together to repel them.
I would say yes as a man, no doubt about it at all.
I can say absolutely.
Yeah, maybe is there something to do with the smell? Like I know red ochre is to do with mosquito repellent, and there's lots of other ways that red ochre benefits.
But the big expert isn't here. Ian's not here. He would sort you out on that. There are other uses for red ochre. But there's no way, the main point about the ochre is why are they so damned intent on it being blood red all the time? You don't need it to be blood red to deal with insects. You don't need it to be blood red to haft. But they're choosing that, they're choosing that. On the smell question, when I say males are being confused, when females are going into ritual mode, they're just taking any possible doubt out of the situation. They're leaving males with no actual options. So it's not like males are able to say, oh, but I know that she is the one who's really menstruating. The whole point is that the females are saying, oh, no, you don't. You're not picking and choosing. They're in solidarity. And because the females are in solidarity, the men then will be in solidarity. That's the whole point of the cosmetic strategy.
Nice one.
So
Jerome, is your hand up again? I can't hear you, Jerome. Maybe the hand's just up for reasons of getting stuck there.
No, sorry, it wasn't. We're just having internet problems.
Oh, I see.
Sorry, we have bad internet. This is Ingrid. Amongst the in Congo, the women actually have a song and a dance about when a man smells a woman. Yes, definitely men can smell women. And the moment that they smell a woman, meaning in a very sexual sense, all they want is a woman. And that is when the women start to educate the men about what it means to want a woman and how you do that. So, well, I only caught the tail end of your presentation, Camilla. I will watch it with anticipation and bated breath when it's up on the on the website. So, yeah.
Enjoy it. Yeah.
Dor Shilton. Over to you, Dor. Can't hear a thing.
Okay, am I on?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Okay, so just continuing with what you just said, I'm also, I've been thinking about bonobos and female coalitions in bonobos. It doesn't have a cosmetic component, and yet they are able to repress male dominance. So that's an interesting fact. But also, just as you said, it's not Like I'm beginning to think it's not just the red ochre, but it's a whole ritual practice,
Oh yes.
and it's a way of becoming one. And this is something that we're thinking a lot about in music evolution.
Oh yes.
It's a way of communicating as one, of gesturing as one. So I'm assuming that this is part of it. So maybe the red ochre is just the cosmetic aspect of it, the visual aspect of it, where it's probably enacted, it's performed. So there are many other aspects to this ritual, that that enacts a female coalition.
Yeah.
Just a note.
Yes, multimedia layering. I'm assuming what Chris was talking about with Bruce Richmond's, the songs, what we know from the polyphonic chorusing of the women of the Bayaka and Hadza and the Khoisan. I'm assuming it's absolutely dance, song. It will go with the pantomimes because the signal that women will need will be wrong sex, wrong species. So pantomimes like the Ilan Bull dance, all of that will go together. It's just that if we're going to the archaeology, the pigments are what remain, and the pigments of what we can compare between Neanderthals and modern humans particularly. So that's why the focus is so much pigment.
But it's not just archaeological visibility, it's also the fact that if you are doing exactly what you're saying, Dor, if you are dancing, singing, and expressing the fact that we are one, don't pick and choose between us. You don't want that one thing, namely one of us is menstruating and nobody else is. It ruin the entire effect. That's the point, isn't it? I mean, the whole point of the synchrony, including the singing, is to be one body, one flesh, united we stand, And the trouble with menstruation is that it allows you to be picked out, and you can't all be menstruating simultaneously. Although that's a sort of mythological ideal in all kinds of hunter-gatherer mythology, but what you can do is present the same color, the same blood, the same flag, which then means the real menstruation is completely transcended. It almost doesn't matter who's really menstruating because you're all raising the same red flag.
But I do wonder how efficient it is in disguising it. Wouldn't men still somehow know through other indications who is menstruating?
But as Camilla said, it doesn't matter. You might sort of vaguely know as an individual. Your nose might be telling you something, but the women are going to make damn sure that it makes no difference. No way you're going to pick a difference between us.
Yeah. The other aspect of this is that, I mean, in some ways, it resembles the famous Ejengi dance of the Bayaka, and in this way, that the men who are willing investors, not the dominant top man, but the ones who like in the middle who want to invest, they're ready to invest in their women, their children. They like the cosmetics. That is the signal that suits them because it keeps the dominant males out. So it's like the Ejengi dance where the men are holding that big penis and not allowing it to get close to the women. And it's like that in that case, the male solidarity is on the side of the women. So both males who are the kin of the women and the males who are willing investors are totally in favor of the cosmetics, totally, and will take part in the cosmetics. Whereas the dominant males don't want it. They're not interested. They want to find menstruation. So it is going to be a sexual selection process, male sexual selection of females, female sexual selection of males, I think.
It's now past. I'm slightly reluctant to simply stop because there might be some very important questions, things to explain, but
Ed had a nice point about the eagle talons. I mean, it is something that is really a consistent tradition over many thousands of years in different places for the Neanderthals. And he was suggesting something about rattles, or the shamanic rattles or something of that kind, rather than these necklace type things. I would not be too unhappy to suggest that there was some gendering on the eagle talons, that it was something to do with male hunting initiation or something of that nature, because it must take a lot of skill to get hold of those raptor talons. Anything anyone else thinks about that?
Actually, there are some things in the chat which you haven't dealt with.
There are.
I mean, obviously, some of you might want to go. We're down to 50 now from about 70 early on. But Gary here, what evidence would support or refute the common ancestor adopting the strategy suggested by Jerome? Ochre use? Didn't Homo erectus use ochre? So that's...
No, to respond to that, again, in Ian's absence, Ian particularly wanted to investigate the flaw of the ochre use at Van der Werk Cave, which is the Northern Cape province, because it was a continuous, Van der Werk is an amazing sequence. It goes back to 1 million years into the Acheulean. Okay, so he wanted to really check every layer by layer where there was ochre, where there's not ochre. So basically Homo erectus, because Homo erectus in sensu stricto that has a brain size under like 1100 cc, there are no well-attested cases of ochre. No. So Gary is right that our model falls if we start finding ochre like 1 million years ago, before this encephalization goes really up. Our case falls. We have to start thinking again. Sure, we'll find a way around it.
So the classic, model that I had all those years ago with blood relations was you have kind of 2 stages in this evolution. And now I think it's now the first stage is the Sarah Hurdy, the grandmothering and the collective childcare, and the second stage is full on sex strike. Full on sex strike means you really need your picket line to extend right across the landscape, and by that stage you should have regular ochre use.
Yeah.
But yeah, all right.
Yeah, just I mean, with Homo erectus, that's going to have moaggio, that's going to be intersubjective, so that you've got these coalitions where people are having a pop at each other, but they're basically in solidarity. That leveling female leveling coalitions. So one female's menstruating and she's catching the eye of the big male, and the other females might be doing all kinds of teasing and laughing and mimicking her, maybe there'd be that kind of stuff going on. But the point is that as the brain size goes up and up and up, there's no, it's hard and fast. You've got to create a taboo. You've got to create the line. You've got to create the picket. That's the difference. It's the difference between banter and fooling about. No, we're saying no. Okay, so Homo erectus, Homo antecessor, because their brains aren't so expanded, there could be all kinds of games going on. Menstruation's still significant, but later it's a hard line. It's going to be
not sure if Denise is still here. I imagine you are. You've got. Could you say more about brain size increase accompanying these other changes? I'm not sure whether you feel, Denise, that we have covered that.
Denise here. Denise is there. Can we clarify what that bit was? Sorry, I can't hear Denise.
Yeah, it's sorry. Hold on.
Hi.
Well, it's just taken as a given, and I'm just not sure that what your explanation is of this constantly expanding brain size.
Okay.
Comparing other changes.
Yeah, I if I'd had more time, we could have gone into social brain hypothesis arguments. I mean, one of the things that people point to for difference is about social network sizes. And it's an interesting thing that Neanderthal brains, our brains are quite similar sizes, so neocortex similar, so our social networks ought to be similar sizes. But as far as female energetics is concerned, whatever is causing the encephalization doesn't make a difference. The females have to do it, whatever. But you could make an argument that there's a kind of feedback loop, that females have to use their social brains more and more to be able to get food and energy subsidy for their offspring social brain. So it kind of gets them into a trap, and that would explain why it goes spiraling upward.
That makes more sense.
Yeah, yes. That's perfectly reasonable. I couldn't explain every. I couldn't tell all those. That lecture is like the Female Cosmetic Coalition's lecture plus all the rest, so it's a bit advanced.
Just to say, just to stress to everybody, we're turning upside down the causal arrow here. So there's so many standard theories just say, oh well, large brains, you know, once you've got large brains, you're going to get language, you're going to get social complexity, you're going to get culture and all that stuff. We're turning it the other way around, because the modern Darwinism just says, yes, brains are great to have, but it's like saying, you know, somebody lives in London or somewhere, it'd be good to have a helicopter, you could get to work quicker, but helicopters are incredibly expensive to run. And so everybody now realizes that you have to take the costs as well as the benefits of everything, including brains, into account. And it's the female of the species that incurs pretty much all the costs of giving birth to and nurturing and, you know, rearing these costly large brain babies. So it's just turning that causality upside down. Just saying large brains do this, that, and the other. We're turning it absolutely upside down. And sort of, how do you get the large brains, and why is it good to have large brains? Yeah. Okay, I think it's time to stop. Unless I can see anybody else with a question. I don't want to discourage, because obviously we needed to go on a bit longer today. Does anyone else wanted to ask a question? Is there anything on the chat which hasn't been dealt with? I don't think so. Everyone's saying it was a wonderful talk.
Provided a nice reference on the Crapina rattles, which is sweet. That's great.
Okay, all right, everybody. And now next week, it's Daw, isn't it?
Is Daw going to be talking?
So,
yeah.
Yes. And it's about music, isn't it, Daw? It's about the origin
cultural evolution of music.
Yes. Okay. Well, look forward to that very much. Yes, brilliant. Thank you, Daw. Great. So don't miss that, everybody. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for being so patient. That's too much.
And thank you, Camilla. I thought that was really, really brilliant. Okay. Bye, everybody. Bye.